We're a couple of minutes late.
Okay.
Jenna has said that she will be running a little bit late, so we will expect her shortly.
You're good, buddy.
On the weekend.
Everybody must know. No, it's not. Oh. Now I'm falling.
Are you ready to turn us on?
Wasn't tracking. Like, oh, no.
Good for you. Oh, yeah.
We're on? Very good. We will get this work session started. Mr. Mayor, Mr. Mayor. Other state fellow. Carter, let's swap. Mr. I did that the other night too. Mr. City Manager, do you have anything for meeting follow up?
Thank you, Ryan. I really don't have
Oh, I
anything for
don't
this part of the
know. I
agenda.
don't know.
Would you mind repeating that?
I do not have anything for follow-up.
Does anybody else have anything for meeting follow up?
I do not think so.
Very good. The applications for the 85,000. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilors, good evening. This is the opportunity that we were anticipating from the staff perspective to receive direction from a process standpoint of how council would like to proceed. As you have requested, we have 5 applications, each of which are vying for either all or portions of the 85,000 that council has made available for social service investment, if you will. The applications that we received, as you probably have seen, we received one from Casper Legion, we received one from Interfaith, from Metro, from the Salvation Army, and Wyoming Food for Thought. And the question that we have tonight is, what can we do to prepare for your deliberation of these applications and ultimate award? There's been a variety of ways that we have taken over the years to try to equip council to make decisions like this. Everything from having each agency come in and make a presentation to not having any presentations or scoring sheets and just sort of going through it as a group. So if it pleases the council, we'd be happy to take that direction this evening, and we'll prepare accordingly for the night, by the way.
Feelings, comments? Kyle?
Sure. Thanks, Mayor. I'll throw them in because I feel like I was kind of part of the reason we're having this follow-up conversation last night. Sounds like most of my colleagues were ready to make a decision last time. I just wanted to give folks a fair shake that didn't necessarily get it during the first time around. I was thankful to receive those applications and learn a little bit more about what they would intend to do with the funding. However, I do personally believe that in light of especially the recent decision we made to purchase some, extend our kennel capacity up at the Metro, I think that was an expenditure to the tune of like 120 grand or something like that, pretty significant. And in our shelter task force meetings, we always talk about the needs up at the animal shelter that just seem to be kind of building exponentially. And so I appreciate the other application and hope that the community supports them. However, I'm going to advocate that we go ahead and allocate the money to Metro just because the need is so great and it's for infrastructure on the city's part. Thank you.
I had,
Hang on. Sorry, Gleason.
I wouldn't, since we're not making a decision tonight, I wouldn't go so far as to weigh in exactly where I think I'd like to see the funding go, but I would say in terms of process, I feel relatively confident that we could just do it by discussion. I don't know that we need like a formal score process with just the 5 applicants. It seems pretty easy for us to just manage it through conversation and not really require anything further. That discussion from my standpoint, I think I have what I need.
I second that.
Was not a motion, right?
Hang on. Vice Mayor. Vice Mayor, you had.
So I guess the reason why I proposed us taking the money and moving it to Metro was just due to the fact that the 1 cent was not supposed to ever be used for nonprofits. And although that over the last 20-some years, we've given nonprofits money, we've had a lot of the constituents complain about us giving nonprofits. Metro has been in desperate need for so long, and so this is some money to kind of help with the overcrowding, which benefits the entire county, basically.
You had a comment, Mr. Pacheco?
Yeah, I'm not prepared to make a decision either or, today, but I think you definitely have a conversation. I agree with what Amber just said, that having more of a further discussion around this would be beneficial.
Back to Kyle.
Thanks, Mayor. This discussion would happen, I guess, alongside other budgetary discussions that we're having. Is there any reason we wouldn't have it tonight?
Basically, tonight's discussion was supposed to be how we want to continue forward. And then whatever we decided as far as going forward would be put on the agenda for the 9th to take care of the issue then. Is that a correct statement from what I heard?
Mr. Mayor, that was certainly our assumption, but I don't think there's any reason, if council's ready to make a decision, that couldn't happen tonight. I don't think you're precluded from, casting a direction one way or the other, but we assume that you'd want to come back, but we may have been wrong in that regard.
Very good.
I mean, either tonight or whenever that would be, I think we owe it to all of those people that applied for this time for deliberation and discussion, and not just to ultimately say we're going to give it to this, which I do agree that Metro is deserving, as are the others. But I think we need to give time and a very thoughtful discussion around those areas before we deliver that. So that's my thought.
We had allotted 5 minutes tonight. We have, and it's not on our agenda here, but we do have an executive session after the meeting tonight, and we were scheduled to be done at 7 o'clock. So if everybody around the table is okay with going ahead and putting half hour, 45 minutes on the work session on the 9th for the further discussion, we would proceed along those lines.
Works for me.
Looks like that's what we'll do, and we'll just discuss it and hammer it out.
No problem. No problem.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Compactor purchase for the landfill.
Mr. Mayor, you were looking in the exact right direction. Ms. Langston is going to walk us through this a little bit. We've got we've got a couple imminent needs that we want to talk to you about tonight. The compactor for the landfill is certainly one of those. And so if I can defer to Cindy, I'd certainly appreciate that.
Mayor, councilors, compactors are fun. They really crush things and they're fun to operate, but they're really expensive. As you can see, it's almost $1 million. And I wanted to review with you the process that we go through when we're going to replace a piece of equipment, whether it costs $100,000 or $1 million. But on $1 million ones, I tend to spend a little bit more time with staff on the steps that we go through. And first, it has to meet the criteria for replacing. On most of our landfill equipment, which we call yellow iron, it has to meet 1,200 hours for our loaders, our compactors, those kinds of equipment, because the Caterpillar has decades of data that shows after 1,200 hours, things start to fail, like your engines and your transmissions, and that's the time you need to look at replacing them. If you want to refurbish them, you need to be looking before the 1,200 hours. This particular compactor was bought in 2001 from another user, and we bought it about a decade ago. So we bought it used, so we always look at used when we can have the opportunity to buy used. So we didn't really have the opportunity to look at refabrication because it had been refabbed when we bought it used. So that option kind of went out the door. And one of the other criteria is the age. Of course, it's very old. We're at 10,300 hours. So if you guys approved us to actually buy it if we ordered it tomorrow, which I mean, Dan order it tomorrow, we get it in about a year, and we utilize about 2,000 hours per year on a piece of equipment, so it'll meet that criteria. And the age and the maintenance, are we seeing a lot of repairs? We have seen a lot of repairs on this engine, and the transmission and the whole compactor, even foot. It's a little over 300,000 right now is what Dan's telling me. So it meets all the criteria. So we looked at used, and right now Caterpillar says it's impossible to find any used compactors in the United States. They just aren't available. So that one we kind of threw out the window. The refab we couldn't do because it's already been refabbed. And we also looked at the option rent to own, and that was prohibitive because of the astronomical rent or interest that they wanted to charge us. So I said, okay, let's look at replacing the whole thing. We do have two because there's two landfills, an unlined and a lined, and they serve as backups to each other. The next one, we will be looking at a different option than replacing. But this one, because of the age and the cost, and the hours, we really feel it's important to replace this one. Another thing that we look at on that 1,200 hours is the oil samples. Dan arranges to have oil samples done about every quarter, and they look for metals. And because of all your wear plates or metals, you'll see metal content, and it's showing that, you know, we have a lot of wear on that engine and the drivetrain. So it's time to replace it, and we're recommending that we replace it with new.
Did you mean 1,200 or 12,000?
12,000, I'm sorry.
Very good.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It is
Nope. that was
12,000. I get to talking too fast and don't think about it.
Not a problem. Very good. That was what I was curious about. Michael.
Thank you. I had I seem to recall that when we took the tour, Cindy, that the compactor, at least, I'm not sure if it's which one, I didn't realize there were two, but the one that we were looking at the time had been, I think you were telling us on the tour that it had been converted from a baling type thing to one that the cubes would go into the bags, and it had to be kind of adapted or something. Am I thinking correctly?
I'm trying to think of which piece of equipment.
Then the main building.
Yeah, it's in the Baylor building.
Yeah.
So the compactor doesn't work, and I apologize. I didn't even tell you really that they're just fun and they crush things. They're actually only in the landfill. They're not in the Baylor building. In the Baylor building, we did modify, and I believe it was the forklift that we had to modify with forks and the loader to accommodate us loading and unloading bales from the trailer.
What I recalled was it was coming out of the compactor. It would come down a
Shoe.
thing and then into the bag.
Right.
But I was thinking you'd said it had been a baling type thing,
Oh, yeah, now I know what you're talking
but it
about.
had
Yeah,
been adapted for the bags.
correct.
So my question is, there's a question in there, is, if on this new equipment, is it specific for bagging, or is it a baling type operation again, or what is it?
So let me clarify. These are compactors. They look like big loaders with sheet
Okay.
foots, and
Okay,
they're in the landfill only.
I see.
We do call the balers compactors sometimes
okay.
because they compact it
Yeah.
into a cube.
Okay,
So
okay,
that's the confusion, is sometimes we
Gotcha.
use the term compactor for the
Okay.
balers.
okay,
And you're correct, we did do some modifications.
okay. So that's
in
not
that
the equipment
operation.
you're talking about, though.
Yeah, this
Okay.
is not. This is
Got it.
totally a landfill operation with
Okay.
the sheep's foot.
Thank you.
basically for a lot of people in the construction business, this would be called a sheet foot roller.
Correct.
Which you see out on the highway jobs and things that have the big lugs on the big roller when they're compacting your road base and
Oh,
stuff.
okay,
That's the piece of equipment
Okay.
she's
Yeah.
talking about.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Did I describe that
You're
appropriately?
perfect. Awesome, Mayor.
I even had a visual,
Do what?
I even had a visual of what you're talking about.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I wanted to be through. Any other questions or comments about this? Are we okay to move forward with the purchase? Looks like you gotta go.
Well, thank you very much. You all have a good evening.
You bet. Capital replacement at the ice arena, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This item, while being very critical, is not near as expensive as what we were just briefed on with Cindy and her team. We have a situation where we have actually budgeted for this replacement. The problem is we budgeted it for next year in the capital agenda, and we really need to spend it this year. The good news is that while 20,000 bucks is no small feat, it is less than what we budgeted for 25 in terms of this piece of equipment on the ice plant, on the ice arena. We've asked Zelina and her team to come visit with us tonight to give you a feel for why we need to move this into the current budget year, the current capital program, if you will, versus waiting until fiscal year 25 begins and commences. So if I could turn the time over to Nick or Zelina or both, well, that would be on.
Absolutely.
Good evening, Mayor and councilors. I am going to take this fantastic opportunity to introduce our new rec manager. His name is Nick Whips. He started with us in November of last year, and this seems like a great opportunity to have him address the city council for the first time. And then we'll both be able to answer any questions that you have. So here's Nick.
Thanks, Zelina. Mr. Mayor, councilors, thanks for having me. And I can tell you that in the 4 months that I've been here, I've learned more about all the nuances that go into keeping ice cold than I would have ever realized. Specific when we're talking about our refrigeration system and this heat exchanger that we need to do replacements on. We work with a company that specializes in just these systems called Total Mechanical. And they come and they do maintenance checks on a very consistent basis. And like Carter mentioned, this is something that we had as a part of our 5-year capital plan, which has been budgeted for fiscal year 25. Last week, Total Mechanical came out and they were aware of this issue. And out of an abundance of caution, they recommended if we could make it happen to make this replacement, to do this replacement sooner rather than later. Not that anybody's in any imminent danger, but we would rather be proactive rather than reactive in this situation and scenario. So that's where we're at, and that's why we were bringing this up tonight.
Does anybody else have a question?
Just hold on.
Go ahead.
So I'm just curious, where exactly, how does the ammonia play a part of all of this? Is that part of making the ice cold?
That's a great question, and I'm glad I brought Chad to provide some more context there.
So yeah, the mic there. So the ammonia is a refrigerant used to keep the ice cold. So how the oil plays into all this is that the compressor motors, runs through, suction and discharge kind of, refrigeration process, and that oil is intertwined with the ammonia. So where we're seeing the ammonia is through this heat plate or gaskets have been worn, which is seeping the oil and creating the ammonia smell in the room. Does that make sense?
Oh. No others? Along that line of the ammonia, is it just kind of a light smell in the room? And do we have good exhaust for that, or how critical is the ammonia leak? I'm more worried about it than I am the
Yeah.
lubrication oil.
So we have a lot of safety mechanisms that, let us know what parts of the million are in the, compressor room at the ring. So, the CTI or CGI, gas detection system is showing no ammonia in there. But the smell is potent just because the oil, again, is intact with some of that, the ammonia fragrance.
And for those that don't know, most of your large, now I'm talking about large commercial facilities, cold storage and things, use the ammonia systems rather than the Freon and things that we use in our residential stuff. And that's where this is coming into play, is this is a large commercial refrigeration system. So,
Mr. Mayor.
Mr.
just
City
to-
Manager.
Thank you. Just to add another critical point for council to be aware of in case you do get called to questions from your constituents. The system that Nick and Chad are talking about here is also equipped with alarms and so forth. Should those levels ever get to the point that they are very dangerous and unsafe. And to my knowledge, we have not had any of those alarms be tripped or kicked off or anything of that nature. However, the emphasis I'd like to place is with respect to the proactivity of this request. So that we don't get to that point is why we're here tonight.
Very good. Now, along those lines, I'm assuming, well, the system's gonna have to come down, or will they be able to finish their hockey season, or is this gonna interrupt the hockey season?
So from our hockey season, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chad, most of our hockey is done.
Okay,
Yes.
very
So,
good.
and from what Total Mechanical has told us, this repair will not affect any of our current operations.
Okay. I just didn't want us to start getting calls from hockey players. Very good. Michael, you had a question?
Just a quick question. Is that, you mentioned the compressor room, Nick, is that ventilated, I'm assuming?
Correct.
Is it with an exhaust fan or something, or? Okay.
Correct. And to Carter's point, there is a very intricate system that alerts us, not only alerts us, but alerts our first responders. And
Yeah.
we, as a rec staff, a Chad staff, everybody in the rec, we have standard operating procedures
Yeah.
for everybody specific to if those alarms are tripped.
Thank you.
Everybody okay with going ahead with the? Looks like get her done.
Thank you.
You betcha. Speed limit changes on Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure council recalls the meeting where Mr. Schriftman came to visit with the council. And he gave council the indication that maybe speed limits on Kaufman, where his residence is located, may be unsafe or at the very least warranting a review. The police department, in concert with our engineering team, did do that. In fact, reviewed the speeds in the area, reviewed the conditions, reviewed the crash data, most of which I believe you have in your packet to review as well, indicating that perhaps a speed limit change would be warranted with regard to the analysis that our teams undertook. And so tonight, we're here to tell you, we'd like to make some changes on Kaufman, and we want to get your take in preparation for an ordinance along the same lines. However, I would like to invite your consideration for a change in process here. This example being sort of a case in point with respect to the process that we would propose, being a lot more administrative and far less ordinance related pertaining to changes that we may need to make in the future with regard to speed limit conditions all over our community. And so while indeed we want to give you some follow-up pertaining to Kaufman specifically, we really need to have a larger conversation, hopefully on the 9th, if you agree, to address the process that a lot of these kinds of questions entail and some improvements we would recommend. And so, yes, we're talking about Kaufman tonight, but we're hopeful to get a green light for a larger conversation on the 9th with you as well. And so with that table being set, I'd like to defer to the chief to walk us through our situation on Kaufman.
Mayor, council, thank you for the opportunity to answer to some of the concerns of your citizens that were brought forward to you back in January. Upon completion of that city council meeting, I met with Mr. Schriftman out in the hallway, kind of obtained some of the documents and statements that he had received from his neighborhood, and decided I would go back and do some research on this. So I gathered 5 years of crash data as the place for us to start. And when I looked at that crash data, there were some anomalies that leapt out at me. So first of all, there were 75 crashes during that 5-year period. Given the length of this section of the roadway in our community and the number of vehicles that are using it as a throughway, it's kind of an arterial route. The 75 crashes in and of itself was not too remarkable. It wasn't something that was super egregious. But there were some commonalities that were immediately apparent to me. First of all, 44% of them occurred under snowy and ice conditions, and that can be expected on a narrow residential roadway where there's parking on the street. Kaufman is on our plow route, so it's a roadway that is plowed. However, for runoff purposes, the road is predominantly domed. And so that in and of itself will kind of make vehicles drift to the edges. Seeing as we cannot control the weather, I had to look for other causes to these crashes. The next thing that leapt out at me is highly unusual. 64% of all of those crashes were into a parked vehicle or into another fixed object, a tree, a fence, a landscaping rock or something like that. That is highly, highly unusual. And so that caused me to really take a hard look at it. Only 35% of them were crashes involving another moving vehicle. So it wasn't a factor of cars crashing into each other as they were passing each other. This was something altogether different. So as I actually called up and analyzed each of the crashes, drew some analysis over what was causing them. Obviously, those snow and icy conditions were specifically identified in the enforcement action resulting from crash investigations 23 times out of that 75. The next nearest one was failure to maintain a proper lane, which essentially says you're leaving the roadway. Failure to grant right of way, that's a no-brainer. Those happen at intersections. Running off the roadway happened 8 times, and that was specifically identified, but it's an overlap of those other ones of not maintaining that lane. So those numbers just drop down till they're just irrelevant to us. What was important to note that not in one single case, the weather notwithstanding, was speed determined to be a factor in any single one of the 75 crashes. So take out of the ones where we say speed was a factor because it was icy and you should have gone slower. For the rest of them, there was no speed related ones. That was further reinforced by the fact that there were a relatively small number of injury causing crashes. In fact, there were only 4. Some of those involved the intersection with CY Avenue. One involved the bicycle. And if you took the bicycle out of it, there wasn't anything other than, my back hurts, or, I might be injured, I'm not sure. Very, very minor injuries. I'm not wanting to discount the complaints of those persons, but there were no serious injuries in any of those crashes. So that led to the discussion of excessive speed or chronic speeding is not the issue. So when I plotted individually all of those crashes into a parked vehicle, that did result in some leaps right off the page at you. I believe you can see it on the monitor right there. There are some concentrations of those areas where vehicles are getting crashed into. And so we have, obviously the tight residential area where the roadway is roughly, an east-west roadway. There's a high concentration there. And then on the long straightaway coming from Wyoming Boulevard, northbound, there are two separate little blossoming areas of those crashes. So we took a good look at those. If you can go to the next picture. So the next picture is that residential area leading towards essentially the area of the school. You'll notice that there's a heavy concentration over there on the east as vehicles are entering into or exiting out of a sharp corner. And then as we're approaching the next corner out there towards the elementary school, there's a slight corner coming up. And so again, we have that concentration of crashes into parked vehicles. Next picture, please. That area on the east is a particularly troublesome area. So this is as you're proceeding northbound on Kaufman and then switching to West Kaufman Avenue. That sharp corner, without question, that is a problem. And in particular, you can't help but notice a concentration of 11 crashes directly in front of just 2 residential addresses. Were I a citizen that lived there, I would not park on the street there. It would just be a futile attempt. Clearly, that's a problem. 11 times in 5 years, that is a very remarkable analysis, not an analysis, but those numbers, they're hard to ignore. We have a problem there. So the next slide is the long straightaway. There are 2 separate areas that are problematic there. The one on the north at the bottom of the picture is that is a wide open roadway. That is a wide roadway. There's really no excuse for those to be happening. And then the near the top, the road is a little bit more narrow, but really that's a long straightaway, limited number of intersections. There's just not a whole lot of excuses there. So what are the conclusions we should draw from this is that the speed limit can absolutely have an impact on creating some changes for us here. So as people are proceeding from the northern part of the southern part of the city towards the north, that long straightaway, especially the wide open area there, the road is wide, there's plenty of space, there's limited intersections, limited driveways. There's no way that I would successfully be able to reduce speed there. So drivers in that section of the roadway would feel a button, regardless of what sign I post on the side of it, they are going to feel comfortable driving approximately 30 miles an hour. If I posted a cop there day in and day out, it would only be marginally successful at reducing their speed just because of the wonderful design of that roadway. But now as we get into these problematic areas where the road narrows, I am comfortable that a reduction in the speed limit will help keep people on the roadway. It will help reinforce the driving that is needed during the winter and snow and the ice conditions that are going to happen on this entire roadway. That particular portion of the city sustains some pretty remarkable winds and drifting. And so I am of the opinion that reducing that speed limit by 5 miles an hour is going to be helpful for us. And so to that end, I am recommending that beginning as indicated in there, there's no need and it would be futile to do the entire length of Kaufman. And so beginning in the troublesome area and extending through all the way essentially until it's getting pretty close. That intersection with Sage Avenue is really, because we're just not having problems past that intersection. Even with the influx of the traffic from the elementary school, we don't have problems there. And the intersection with CY Avenue, even though that is an amazingly busy area, we're just not having problems there. So from Sage to the roadway to the south, the cross street to the south, and I'm standing here just having a complete mind blank what the name of that Grandview. I'm going from memory, Grandview. And so, I am recommending that 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. If you'll go to the next picture for me. Right there, you know, rather than waiting for us to, get some direction from council on this, we teamed up with the street engineering. And we went and installed these two signs. Next picture, please. And these are the signs that are directly in front of that sharp corner, Highview and Grandview Apartments. And so we posted these to help trying to caution people. We're gonna be judging what the impacts of this. So between the reduction in speed in this area, the posting of these caution signs, we're hoping to reduce that heavy concentration area, especially in front of those two poor residences. We'll continue to monitor this in the future, and if we don't get a reduction in these crashes into parked vehicles or fixed objects, then my next step would be to look at putting in some no parking areas on that. That's not a sure thing, because if I eliminate parking from one side of the street, wow, the street's wider, so now I feel comfortable driving faster. So it's not a sure fix. But it is an area that we could consider in the future. We would also look at making these flashing caution signs if we're still unsuccessful in reducing these crashes. So in a nutshell, the data should be leaping off the page at you that this is a wise decision that our citizens brought to our attention. I concur with that. This council should know that I'm usually very hesitant to emphasize or to recommend changes to speed limits based upon individual citizens and their perceptions. I try to rely on the data. This data is unmistakable. I believe in my heart that we should reduce the speed limit on here, that will give me time to analyze it again, because frankly, the only real thing that's going to reduce crashes here is by widening the road. And the city of Casper is not in a position to buy up a lot of private land and condemn it and widen that roadway. These are the options that we have for us. Lastly, before I take questions from council, I want to reinforce what the city manager implied. It's very much the police department and our streets department, public services. We're very much eager to be more nimble and responsive in our ability to address these things. But under the current model, we have to bring this to you for every section of the roadway's got to be enumerated. It's cumbersome. It's time consuming. We have to get it scheduled in on your already busy dockets. And we would strongly recommend that it's going to be advantageous for our citizens, for our public safety efforts, and for our streets and our police officers to find a better method to be more quick, more nimble in our ability to address identified traffic issues. And so I'm trying to convey that the police department strongly supports kind of an analysis of how are we going to go about determining what the speed limit should be in our community, and how cumbersome do we want that process to be. So currently, under the current ordinances, we have to enumerate by city, by chunk of the roadway, in specificity, which requires the traditional amendment processes and public hearings and 3 readings, publications and things like that. And that is just not consistent with how quick we want to respond to identified public safety issues. With that, I'll answer any questions.
Very quickly, I'll get to your question. As a follow-up to what the city manager and the chief mentioned, is that basically, and what we would be looking at is we could go ahead, and if we approved this, it would be a 3 reading public hearing, just as the chief mentioned. By the same token, we could go ahead and choose to modify our ordinance, which would take 3 readings, public hearing, but we could change our ordinance to where basically it would be almost an administrative situation, and it would come before us as a resolution, which is 1 reading, we say, and we go on, which council still has a say in the process, but basically he could come to us Well, basically, if we said yes to this and it was under the new resolution idea, there could be a resolution ready for next week. We could say yes, and by the 3rd of April, this could be implemented, as opposed to 6 weeks from now. Is that kind of?
Thank you. Good job.
Very good. So that's kind of what we're talking about as well, is are we willing to change the ordinance? Because if so, maybe we would be better off, instead of having 2 ordinance changes, 6 public hearings, to go ahead and postpone the implementation of this, get our ordinance changed, and go forward at that point. So that's why I said time out on your questions and things. So that's actually a different deal.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, Mr. City Attorney.
Counselors, so just to put a little finer point on that, the proposal would be on the 9th for me to present kind of an analysis of what I see as the law surrounding setting of speed limits. I can tell you that the position of my office has been historically that it had to be done by ordinance, that each and every change has to be enumerated and enacted through an ordinance process. I have a different take on that. I can tell you that from reviewing other municipalities throughout the state, we're the only municipality that does it this way. The statutory construction is based on the Uniform Act for the Regulation of Motor Traffic. So it's adopted in a number of states. Cities in Colorado do it differently. And there is actually some case law that I think the crucial determination is whether or not the delegation to staff or doing it through a resolution would be an illegal legislative delegation of power, which I don't believe it is. And I'm prepared to walk you through that on the 9th and explain why I think it would be permissible. And if you agree, then I think then there's a further discussion, because no municipality does it quite the same. Some is purely administrative, others do a resolution. They incorporate by reference to the ordinance exhibit that has the lists enumerated, but that can be changed without having to reenact or amend the ordinance every time. So I think there's some discussion around that. What is clear and would be, regardless of whether we stayed with the current ordinance or did an amendment to that, is that the state statute requires us to do traffic studies pursuant to rules adopted by YDOT. And so they've, chapter 30 of the YDOT rules has a whole template of how you go about making a determination as to what the maximum speed limit should be. So regardless, whether it's administrative, a resolution, or an ordinance change, we've got to make sure we go through there. And while I think this crash analysis is very compelling, I'd have to talk with engineering to make sure that that would be sufficient to satisfy that. So I think today, part of it would be that if there's a thumbs up to continue to do some research on Kaufman to make sure that we've got the analysis compliant with the YDOT rules. And then secondly, if you would like that presentation on the 9th to explore options, I think that would be some helpful direction as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Thanks, Chief. This was a super helpful analysis. I didn't know if you would ever bring us a recommendation that a speed limit should be reduced. I think this is one of the things that we've heard. It gets brought up quite a bit from constituents, and typically the analysis does not support any activity on our part. So to see one that did, it does jump off the page and very different than other analyses that we've been presented with. So it was really helpful, and I appreciate it. I think to me it seems that resolution would be a good fit for these types of decisions. I don't know that I'd like to see it go all the way to an administrative process, because it is an area that citizens tend to be relatively active in and vocal in, talking about their neighborhoods. And I wouldn't want to remove the opportunity for neighbors to weigh in about the potential impacts. But I think one reading is probably sufficient for that. They're not usually overly complex situation. So I think that's feels appropriate, and would definitely like to hear your analysis on it, Eric. I would say, I think I might feel a little bit more comfortable if we just went ahead and proceeded with this change now through the current process that we have while we continue to work on the analysis of the process. Because in my estimation, the analysis of the process could actually take longer than just pushing this through in the next 6 weeks. So, I don't want to hold this up while we work on the process, which seems like, it's a related issue, but I feel like we could just get this going through and deal with the process, concurrently, but, seems to me that changing the ordinance, that's still gonna take 3 readings. We haven't even had a single work session on it yet, so it feels like that's actually behind this, which is already moving forward. So that would be my preference, but, just so that we don't see any delays on this particular, issue, but I support really both of them separately.
I have a quick question. You said that we will still have to go ahead and do a YDOT check to make sure that this is gonna work. Or that this is a sufficient traffic study. Is that,
Mr. Mayor, that is correct, and
Okay.
my understanding is traditionally our engineering department handles that. I haven't been involved, but that would, we would definitely have to be compliant with that.
what I was curious about is roughly how long would you anticipate that to take?
Mr. Mayor,
Trying to weigh Amber's comments with what Kyle may bring up that may answer a little bit of yours.
the analysis, Your Honor, that we typically go through, and analyzes the warrants that we're concerned about, which is generally consistent with what YDOT would, require. So, it usually involves speed analysis and those kinds of things. I wouldn't think it would be, inordinately long. So I'd say in a couple of weeks, given that the weather is what it is right now, is probably the highest amount of time that I can see it taking.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mayor, and City Attorney and Chief for all the information. Appreciate the context. I also really appreciated the presentation. I spent several years living on Kaufman, and so all of your statistical analyses line up with my own personal experiences. I'm actually really surprised there's so many wrecks on South Kaufman there, because for like a good quarter mile of that street, it is a very, very broad street, very wide street. And for like a quarter mile, there's no street facing driveways. It's just fence for like a quarter mile. So, and it seems like it's right along where all those are at. So that's really surprising to me, because you don't even have vehicles entering the roadway. But all sounds totally in line. That road is way too narrow right there. And when you're taking that turn, especially when there's oncoming traffic, there, you feel squeezed. So yeah, I'm totally on board with all of this. And I would concur with Councilor Pollack that I think we still need to have still needs to be some mechanism to solicit public input, and we still need to have some degree of influence on it. I think of like 2nd Street going from 30 to 20 back to 30 kind of thing. But I also have faith that relying on the data, we're going to come to the right decision 99% of the time. And so I guess I'll defer to city staff as far as what you think the most expedient or efficient way would be to go about realizing the changes we'd like to see. But yeah, I agree that a resolution probably gives us the influence that we'd like, an opportunity for public input, but we can be a lot more efficient in the way that we go about this. That's all I got. Thanks.
Lisa.
Just as a question for the attorney, Eric, I guess if we pursue this with Kaufman ahead of time, are we double dipping the work? Are we creating additional work?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, from my perspective, I don't think so. I mean, and I think from staff's perspective, it's going to be similar. The only additional thing is you're going to have 2 sets of public hearings, 2 sets of publication, 3 readings, on both. So from that perspective, it's going to be a little more time during council and a little more expense. Not sure exactly what that would be, but I think from a legal analysis standpoint, from the data analysis standpoint, we're gonna have to do that work regardless. It's just how it gets implemented. There'll be some changes.
The reason I asked the question about having to still do the study and how long that would take is that basically, if we said do the study, which has to be done regardless of which way we go, then that gets us to our work session on the 9th before this study would even come up. Is that correct? Roughly speaking.
Your Honor, I would agree with that characterization, yeah.
So would it be possible for us to say, go ahead and start down the study route, and we bring this discussion about keeping the ordinance versus resolution versus administrative for the work session on the 9th, and then we make a decision at that point, do we write the ordinance change, go through the 3 readings, or we're then at the point we could start down the 3 readings for this, and we haven't lost any time as far as the times are going along to get this implemented. Would that be a reasonable suggestion?
I'm happy with that.
Is that a possibility, Mr. City Manager?
So let me be
Or
sure.
are we totally full on the 9th?
No,
Okay.
I may just not be completely following and that happens, you know.
You want me to run through it again?
Well, let me see if I can run through it and make sure I got it captured. If we get the green light to go forward with the warrants analysis, we can do that concurrently with the discussion that potentially will be happening next week. Is that a good summary?
Yes.
Yeah, we, absolutely.
And then on the, I think the 9th is our next work session.
Correct.
Yeah.
2 weeks, I'm sorry, 2 weeks.
Yeah. So, yeah, that was what I was gonna say, is that basically then on the 9th, we decide that, okay, we'll have the warrant study done. Now we can either proceed with an ordinance, and actually we could proceed with changing the ordinance literally at the same time. So we only do 1 public hearing, 1 change, and we still wind up with this implemented on the same time frame that we're on right now.
I think that has some possibility, you bet. The only caveat I would add is, for whatever reason, we were not able to get the amount of speed data that we would normally want to measure up against the warrants, but otherwise, I think that all theoretically makes a lot of sense.
Again, that delays that whole process even further.
Right.
So it still gives us plenty of time
Absolutely.
to discuss this. Okay, so we're all still okay with that? Can we get that on the agenda then for the 9th?
Absolutely.
Very good. And then we will proceed and we will get this taken care of. It's just a question of which way we will go after the 9th, whether we will go 2 separate routes or just 1.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. We appreciate it. And appreciate your staff. And I don't know if you did it personally still, whoever did this, that's great work. And yes, it hits you in the face. So thank you.
Thank you.
Legislative review. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councilors. I appreciate the opportunity to review the outcome of the legislative session that we recently concluded. And by all means, if indeed we didn't hit on some of the topics of interest for yourselves, let me know. While I may not have all the answers for every piece of legislation that was considered and talked about, we can certainly do some research and find out more information if we need to. So please keep that in mind, pursuant to what I'm about to go over with you. As council is aware, the primary purpose of this session was to pass a budget for the next biennium. And without a doubt, that dominated a lot of the conversation, but in many cases was shadowed by some of the conversation as it relates to gun-free zones and the discussions around the abolishment of said zones. We also had a lot of conversation, much more in line with budgetary implications that property tax relief would bring to, the state's budget and certainly local budgets, as it were. And so, between the three of those broad topics, there was quite a bit of energy exercised in those areas over this last legislative session. You noticed in your packet there the chart that Claire and her team put together in concert with WHAM and some of their information that they were willing to share with us as it relates to a number of the pieces and parts of legislation that WHAM was following and that cities and towns were broadly interested in. And of course, there was a lot of overlap with respect to what it is the council identified as being important to all of you as well. And so just to hit on some of the high points, property tax relief, council may be aware that there were 21 bills brought forward throughout this session. You'll notice in the chart that 3 of them actually passed. One of the 4 that were brought forward to the legislative process, was actually vetoed by the governor. And you'll notice that in the Senate file section, demarcated in red, what that bill was all about. As for the bills that actually passed, you'll notice in the comment section, one of the bills that was pretty popular was for those who have been a property owner in Wyoming for 25 years and are at the age of 65. That bill anticipates a 50% exemption, which for those in that category, I would say is a pretty nice measure. I wasn't pointing fingers, Your Honor. That is a nice measure, and I'm sure will bring a lot of relief to individuals. It seems like, though, the fiscal impact statewide is relatively small. It sounds like that's about a $4 million impact that's anticipated. And the question that I certainly would have too is with respect to what the backfill provision would be, which fortunately was a pretty common feature as it related to a number of the property tax discussions that took place over the last 60 days or whatever it was. So we were grateful for that at WHAM, and as your manager, I was happy to see that. That feature was prominent in the next piece of legislation that actually passed, House Bill 4, which allows for refunds for income qualified applicants. There is a backfill provision associated with that particular potential impact, if you will. And I don't have a real good feel for what that is as I sit here in front of you tonight. But the good news is it sounds like whatever that impact is, we're going to be kept whole, and I'm grateful for that. The other property tax measure that passed was with regard to capping increases from year to year. That cap was legislated at 4% in terms of year-over-year growth. I would say that would have the possibility of, being somewhat of a measure in terms of some of the growth we've seen over the years. The good news is, though, that we're not seeing any clawback provisions in this legislation that would take away some of the growth that we've incurred from a revenue standpoint, which I'm happy to see. The gun-free zones discussion that took place was stunted in terms of its progress, in that the governor did veto House Bill 125, which would have repealed gun-free zones, as we are aware and familiar with as a government body. Government meetings certainly would have been made to be a forum where guns could be present, albeit in concealed nature, had this passed. At this point, there is some discussion among the legislative community that would suggest that this would be a good reason for the legislature to be reconvened to see if, in fact, that veto could be overridden. It's unclear as to whether or not that will push the tolerance of the legislative delegation to make a reconvening happen. And so we will wait and see if that should be the case. If it is, this topic will undoubtedly be foremost among the legislature to see if they have the votes to override the governor's veto. Moving into the Senate file section of your chart here, the one that I wanted to bring up to your attention was with regard to, let's see, Amendment A. That would be Senate File 90. Senate File 90 did pass. And in fact, it's the only Amendment A legislation, empowering legislation that made it through the gauntlet of the legislative deliberation. This is an important first step to have been taken, albeit I hope not the only step legislatively that will be taken as it relates to supporting Amendment A and engaging the authorities that the voters were comfortable with. This is the direction that allows to the treasurer to put together a program. We liken it to sort of a WyoStar on steroids, if you will, in that it allows for equities to be considered for local governments in the parameters that the treasurer's office would create through the program it develops. And so we anticipate that programming to be brought forward over the next year, and potentially something the city of Casper would participate in. Our hope is, however, as we've told you in previous legislative discussions in the past, that we'd like to see this expanded to those tools being pursued through private investment efforts that cities like ours can take advantage of. That is not available at this point in time, as in Senate File 90 did not go that far. The other piece of legislation that I would bring your attention on the Senate side is with regard to what we saw in the contractor licensing world. Reciprocation was a big discussion, not only in this session, but in previous sessions as well. And that did finally cross the finish line, wherein reciprocal licensing will be allowed and recognized across local jurisdictional boundaries. And I'm looking forward to seeing how, in fact, that can be implemented and still be able to see to the safety of our constituents through building inspections and so on. And of course, obviously, contractor licensing. Those are some of the items that did pass. Obviously, I hit most of the highlights more so than an exhaustive review of those that passed. I do have a couple comments on some bills that did not pass, but I'd certainly be willing to entertain questions for those that did.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if I could just clarify, so Senate File 67 actually was vetoed by the governor. So there, the 1% contribution increase for public employees, which would be general employees of the city, did not pass.
So that should be in red then. Not know that on publication.
Vice Mayor.
I have a question on Senate File 4.
Okay.
So is that, I'm just kind of, how can you be hired and retired at the same time? So is that like Social Security and everything says that you can only work X number of hours a week to be able to maintain your benefits? Is this got any kind of restrictions like that, or they can receive a full salary while they're working and a full retirement salary? Is that, I don't understand that.
Mr. Mayor and Councilor, I may need to look a little further into some of the implications of your question, but the basic idea is that retired firefighters will be allowed to be retired and continue in receiving their retirement benefits. The parlance that I hear a lot as it relates to general employees who are in the general fund, retirement fund, I should say. That is a benefit that I've seen some of my colleagues in those retirement funds take advantage of. And as near as I can tell, that's simply being allowed extended, if you will, to retired firefighters as well. Their funds are different than the funds that an employee like myself would draw from once I retire. And so that clarification must have been needed to be made pursuant to the uniqueness of the funds that support retired firefighters. But not unheard of in the general parlance for retired local government employees.
Very good. Amber?
Thank you. Carter, have you gotten any clarity since the session ended? As I was listening to the discussion around property tax bills, it seemed a little bit unclear about how the bills that did pass would interact with one another. There are some overlaps that I can see, particularly, it looks like House Bill 3 and 4. Has there been any further clarity provided at this time about, are they stackable? Do they, like, how do those two things, should somebody be eligible for both? How does that impact us?
That's a really good question, in your honor. I'm afraid I don't have a whole lot of clarification with respect to that. I would say that there probably ought to be some consideration with regard to how that can work, because certainly if someone is also income qualified for that second piece of legislation that you're referring to, they could very well come close to not having to pay any property tax. And I'm not sure that that was the legislative intent or not.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, fair. Let me do a little more work if I could.
Okay.
Mr. Bond?
Thank you, Mayor. I did have a question about that same set of file 4 about the retired firefighters as well. But to the Vice Mayor's question about the retired person being rehired, the school district had years of practice with that, so, and it got to be pretty contentious, which it resulted in some changes. But the way I think the Wyoming retirement system looked at it was that, and the way our HR department looked at it was, your retirement is a benefit that you've earned. It's like insurance or something like that. You've earned it. You've put in the number of years. You've reached the right age to receive that benefit. But what we had to look at was the benefit to the organization and to the system of what's the benefit of rehiring a person who's retired. And that's what I'm wondering about this situation. But in the situation with the school district, with there were many, including myself, people who were retired who had lots of experience, and years of development and experience and so forth. And our HR department kind of looked at that as kind of, okay, that's a resource that we could tap into, particularly in like fields like special education and math, science, where it's difficult to hire people. And there's shortages of teachers in those areas, in particular, even here in Casper. And so that was the benefit to the organization, was to be able to call those people back into service. And they were, and it was really irksome, I think, to some of our board members. It was kind of double dipping and so on and so forth. But, and then what resulted was the district ended up passing a policy, I believe it was the employee had to wait, I think 1 year, 1 full calendar year from time of their retirement till they could be rehired. And I think the Wyoming retirement system adopted that same rule that you cannot, if you draw your retirement, you can't go back to work in a Wyoming district for 1 year. So my question about the firefighters was, does that help us at all with our staffing issues with firefighters? I would think it shouldn't help, but I don't know.
Mr. Mayor, Counselor Bond, Vice Mayor. So I was able to look this up just to be clear. So the retirement system is actually made up of seven different plans. And so there's actually 2 fire plans, Fire A and Fire B. One is closed, one is not. And they did not have this retired rehire rule in that plan. And so what this does is it allows retired members to be rehired pursuant to statute 9-3-415, which puts some guardrails and basically says that they have to make an election when they come back. They can either discontinue their retirement benefits and be reinstated as a contributing member, or they can continue receiving retirement benefits but not be reinstated as a contributing member. So therefore, if they're retired and pulling benefits, their continued employment won't increase that monthly benefit.
Right.
So
right.
It's something that's been in place for the general retirement fund for a while, and so I'm guessing this is parity across the board. I have seen this as an effort in hard to recruit for areas to then open that pool up to folks that are retired who may want to come back in a different capacity to work. So it could help with recruiting. I don't know if it'll help our specific situation, but certainly statewide. The other thing that's interesting, and I don't know for certain, but typically firefighters and oftentimes police do not qualify for Social Security if they're part of a retirement system. So for many of our firefighters and police officers, retirement is their only retirement benefit that they get. They don't pay into it. So
Oh, I did not know that.
The other thing I was just gonna add too is that, so in whatever public employee, but what's happening specifically with educators was, so many of them would retire from Wyoming and then would move to another state and go back to work, which is fine and dandy, but you know, we lost their experience and we had grown those people professionally over a course of years, and so we were losing the benefit of if they were well qualified and valuable. Thanks, Eric.
Mr. Mayor, if I could answer the Councilor Bond's question just a little further. I'm not aware that we have a whole lot of retirees who are angling to get back into the department. Typically, when they retire with full retirement benefits, they're at an age where passing the combat challenge test would be, prohibitive for them to be active and on the line. However, I'm sure, as Eric mentioned, there are hard to recruit areas where being able to have a retired firefighter among their ranks is probably very advantageous. I'm not sure that it's something that the city of Casper deals with on a regular basis.
Anything else? I did have one question, and this may wind up in our finance director's purview, but the public officer training amendment. Where do we stand with that? Is that going to still apply to the people here, or will that just apply to the people in your department and our finance department and those people?
Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, I'll take a crack at that. And if Joe wants to add to that, I'd certainly welcome that. That was a bit of a surprise, this piece of legislation, in that there was such a passionate pursuit of having some sort of standardization among those who make financial decisions in local government, to be able to be required to adhere to in the previous session, that to change it at all was really surprising. I just didn't expect it. And so I'm not sure as to the genesis of why that came forward. My practical recommendation would be that this legislation really didn't change the scope a whole lot with regard to who should take the training at the local government level, but probably did give a pass to a lot of our special districts that are out there in terms of who they should bring forward for training, which I find really interesting. Furthermore, it does sound like that the penalties with respect to what happens if the training is not taken, it is somewhat softened. So, again, real interesting legislation, given the level of conversation in just one session ago. But regardless, we plan to comply, and I'm real proud of the response that we've had internally in terms of those who have participated, which all of you have been one of those, and I appreciate that.
I just didn't know if it was going to affect new council members, so sounds like it will still be business as usual for us.
I do not disagree.
Okay.
I don't disagree. I think the city manager did a great job of explaining that.
Okay, very good. That was all I had. Does anybody else have anything along these lines? Then is there anything on the agenda review? Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moving to the grid document that you are all familiar with now. I would draw your attention to some of the items that we have coming up here. We're moving into April, which, as many of you know, April tends to be a bit of a foot race as we get into May, which is where we deliver the budget to all of you. So, you know, a lot of the conversations that we'll be having between now and May have a lot of nexus with respect to the budget. As a matter of fact, we're going to be talking about staffing here, not in the not too distant future with you. We're going to be talking about wages in the not too distant future with you, as certain precursors to where we need to be from a budgetary design perspective. MRG is a discussion that's coming up on the 9th. The Fly Casper Alliance would like to visit with you after having visited with the county. A lot of the commentary I'm gathering from the county commission has been, where's the city of Casper and all this? And so you will have that conversation to deliberate, and certainly that has budgetary influence, as you might imagine. The other thing that I'd like to point out about the grid document, if you don't see items of interest docketed already in April and May, please refer to the back page and see if in fact those items don't show up there. And if we have dropped the ball on your item of interest, let's talk about it tonight and be sure we get it put in the appropriate space on the planning document. And that's all I really have.
Does anybody else have anything?
Thanks, Mayor. I would just like to add, the city manager referenced it. I haven't had the opportunity to talk to any of them myself, but perhaps you or the vice mayor having your leadership breakfast, but several county commissioners did remark that they would like to see the city more invested, and we're even throwing out suggestions that we cover half of the MRG. So, you know, just over $300,000 for the first 6 months, and then another 300. So, you know, it'll end up being over $500,000 investment if they do make that recommendation or, you know, apply that pressure towards us. So just something to keep in mind as we have that discussion. It looks like, at least from the county's perspective, they're looking for the city to contribute much more than we have been.
They were all county residents. Does anybody else have anything? Then it looks like we are to council around the table. Ms. Haskins.
I don't have anything of substance.
I do.
Oh, wait a minute.
Is
We'll go to Amber.
I'll let you determine how much substance there is, but I do have some things. We had a Metro Animal Shelter Task Force meeting last Wednesday. We talked mostly about the potential creation of a joint powers board or some other governing body, with each local municipality having a proportionate amount of representation and financial obligation to, you know, maintain and sustain the shelter into the future. So we're working through the details of what those bylaws might look like and how that governing body would look. the number of members, how frequently they're meeting, et cetera. We did mention that feel free to correct me if I'm misstating, city manager, but I believe we had determined that it costs around $880,000 direct and indirectly to run that shelter. And historically, it's been the city of Casper that has shouldered that burden. And so if that shelter is going to be accepting animals from all over the county, essentially, we'd like to set up a structure to where those folks have a seat at the table, and also that we are all collectively planning for, the shelter needs to be replaced. So there needs to be a plan to build new. Is probably going to be, I imagine, what the suggestion is, but so we're hashing that out and working with our surrounding municipalities to find a path forward on that. I attended my Casper Housing Authority meeting virtually last Thursday, wasn't able to show up in person. Not much to remark on, other than they have very high utilization of their properties with only a few vacancies. So good to see that. They did recently close Kids Campus, so that was a kind of a controversial thing that had happened several weeks back. Some parents were upset that a child had gotten out of the facility for several minutes, and they ended up showing up to the town of Evansville council meeting because they're the ones who, I believe, issued the business license since it's in town of Evansville. And so at least TBD, Kids Campus is closed for the time being. And then lastly, there was another public meeting on the potential plans for a gravel pit off Coates Road. That was last Thursday night. I saw Councilor Bond was there. There was also Representative Steve Harshman, Commissioner Dave North was there. The keynote speaker, I guess you could call him, of the evening was Secretary of State Gray. Just a couple quick updates if my colleagues haven't been following what's been going on with that issue. Representative Harshman had made some amendments to Senate File 44 during the session that were to preserve local control and required a conditional use permit from the county for LMOs or limited mining operations. Among other things, the governor did veto this bill, stating that it was a statutory solution to a Casper specific problem and that it would give counties too much control over state lands. There will be a slip meeting on April 4th with these leases on the agenda and public comment allowed. And it was just announced, I think, since we've been in this meeting, that meeting will be here in Casper at the Tyler Thompson building. The Secretary of State, when he was speaking last Thursday, he reported dissatisfaction with the fact that the vote to grant those mineral leases was on a consent agenda vote and believes them to have warranted more discussion, considering the placement and the potential impact to adjacent property owners. He explained the Director of State Lands does not serve at the pleasure of the board and apparently reports directly to the governor. So, interesting to learn how that all works. I'm not sure what, if anything, the slip board can actually do to turn back the clock on their actions, but it does seem like the next step would be the operator of that potential mine seeking a conditional use permit from the county, which is required per their zoning regulations. It's M1 over in that area, and a conditional use permit would be required regardless of what happened with Senate File 44. The folks that have created this opposition group have created a legal entity called the Casper Mountain Preservation Alliance. And my understanding is that it's to broaden their scope beyond just this specific project, to allow them to pull their financial resources, file legal briefs and whatnot. They've elected officers, they're writing bylaws right now. I saw the city manager was quoted in an article earlier today remarking on the fact that in 2021, this council had created a LAD, local assessment district on Coates Road with both the county and adjacent property owners to pave about a mile of Coates Road, south of Highway 220. The road that was built at that time was not expected to sustain heavy industrial traffic. And so I personally believe that we have an obligation to protect that investment. It's definitely going to be an ongoing conversation. I would encourage folks that are interested to show up to that slip board meeting again on April 4th at the Tyler Thompson building. And if a conditional use permit is applied for through the county, I would advocate that this body have a discussion about that and potentially draft a letter taking a position on that topic for the county's consideration during that public comment period. So if I'll be following it, if I see a conditional use permit as applied, I will be coming back and asking that we put it on a work session and have a chat about it. That's all I got.
I don't have anything. There are a few meetings coming up in the next couple of weeks, so I'll have information to share after those. Thanks.
Good.
Only meeting I've had since I last updated y'all was the same Metro meeting that Kyle was at, and I don't think he missed anything. It was very thorough. I have been, in some correspondence with some of the folks, what's it called, Casper Mountain Preservation Alliance now, as well, and kind of indicated the same thing to them, that if the conditional use permit is applied for, then, you know, I think the activity that we would be able to entertain would be some sort of position to the county to, you know, in support or opposition of that. And so I would advocate that we, to Kyle's point, that we take that up as a council should something come before the county, because we've got lots of citizens in our areas that are concerned about this. So I think it's worth discussing here, even though we are not the ultimate determining body of the outcome. I think it is appropriate for us to weigh in. That's all.
As Councilor Gamera said, I was at the Coast Road meeting as well. He did a great job of covering the meeting and so forth. It was interesting to watch and listen, and I know quite a few folks who live in that area, and so they've reached out through emails and phone calls and things like that. So it's an interesting situation. And I, as Councilor Pollack said, I think there are other people in the county and the city who were concerned, with potential, drift of air pollution and noise, so forth, into the PV area and so forth, that could have a negative impact as well. So yeah, I would look forward to that conversation on the 9th or whenever we have it, and to, if there's something, just have a conversation about if there's a position we'd like to take or not. So I was invited a couple weeks ago. I didn't mention this last week. I was invited to give a welcome at the Wyoming Education Association, just a welcome address to the beginning of their delegate assembly convention the weekend before last. And thanks to Carter's office and Jolene, and Steve, we had a very nice welcome letter from the mayor that I was able to read to them. They were very, very appreciative, and just kind of encouraging them to take advantage of everything Casper has. So that was a great letter. Last thing, I attended yesterday the Senior Center Board meeting. I was able to be there in person, and a couple issues that were interesting that they talked about. Number one is their Night at the Races fundraiser on April 26th. I understand Councilor Jensen and the mayor and Zulima will be jockeys, and so
We don't know.
or horses. Don't let them
They'll
get
tell
on
you
your
when you
back.
get there.
That's right. Oh, didn't they tell you you're a horse? And tickets are available at the senior center. I think you can buy them maybe through their website or something. Maybe you probably have to go in to pick up your tickets, or they might mail them to you. One thing that did come up that was kind of interesting was the conversation about apparently and I'll give you the cursory description, but apparently the state senior commission or board or whatever is looking at beginning they call them senior districts, where, and I don't know if it's a funding process, but the director, Amy, was talking about that, she would be able to apply for a $300,000 grant for the senior center to help with their operation. And the senior center does so much besides just meals and a gathering place. I mean, they provide people that go into homes and provide care and provide, support and so forth to seniors who are homebound. And then a question that came up through that was that whether this senior district could perhaps be a mechanism to pursue senior housing. Apparently that there's a concern about affordable housing for seniors. And yeah, it is I've heard that issue before, and so they may be, we talked about the Casper Housing Authority being the city's arm in housing, and so I don't know if they'll be approaching Casper Housing Authority or the city about looking at some potential grants to support the construction of new housing, so stay tuned. And then the last thing they will be asking for, should be contacting our streets department or services about, they just need some handicap parking spaces repainted and some signage in their parking lots. If that's Zulima or who they will talk to, but that'll be coming forward. So that's one of their needs. That's all I have.
Mr. Pacheco.
Don't think I have anything. I'm gonna say something, but I think I should all wait.
You sure?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
I'll get myself.
Building suspense.
Cliffhanger.
Say again?
Building suspense.
Yeah.
I don't have anything tonight.
Very good. Yeah, basically, yeah, I was out last 3 days last week. I was out yesterday. But have several meetings coming up regarding, planning and everything to get ready for the SLIB meeting on the 4th, which will be the next step in our $4.1 million grant that the Wyoming Business Council has approved. And that is for the sewer line that will go from our North Park area of development down and around and tie in down that, in essence, Poplar and the interstate. So that's what that money is for. And several meetings with several of the elected 5 this next week coming up before the SLIB meeting. So we will be actively campaigning for that. Beyond that, I think pretty well done. So we will call the end of the work session and we will start into our next meeting. I now call the March 26, 2024 special council meeting to order. The chair would entertain a motion to by minute action excuse the absence of Councilor Jensen.
So moved.
Second.
Yeah. Any abstentions or nay votes? All saying aye?
Aye.
The motion passes. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Notice of an executive session to take place at this date and during the meeting was given. We have matters to discuss regarding personnel. Therefore, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn into executive session and at the conclusion of that executive session to reconvene this special meeting solely for the purpose of adjournment of this special meeting.
So moved.
Second.
There are a majority of members present and a motion to adjourn into an executive session has been moved and seconded. This motion requires a 2/3 majority of the council present. Any abstentions or nay votes? All voting aye?
Aye.
The motion passes. A greater than 2/3 majority of the council present voted in favor of the motion. We are hereby adjourned into an executive session. Go for it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.